is going to be expelled. Did you know that there are some evil manipulations in homes? That's why people get sick. That's why people quarrel. That's why there are all manners of confusion within the house. It's not in the people themselves, but rather it's in the fact that there's a spirit that's hiding somewhere in the home, somewhere in the family, somewhere in the rooms. Oh my God, I wish I can tell you some spiritual things. These days we'll teach on some deep spiritual things, because did you know that sometimes sorcerers, witches and wizards, they can actually meet in some people's homes. So they're meeting in some people's homes, and these people they won't even know that their house, or that room in their house, has become a meeting place of witches, a meeting place of sorcerers. Follow me. You can have a room in your house, a place in your house. Maybe you just moved in. Maybe Maybe you haven't consecrated and the house unto the Lord. Or maybe it's just not a house that fire is rising in the place of prayer. If there's no altar there, then any other altar can be established. Listen, when there's a vacant territory and land, it's open for takeover. And so any space where an altar has not been built, I'll say it again, whenever there's a vacant space, a vacant environment, a vacant land, a vacant building, that an altar to God has not been established, it's open to be taken over by any other entity. Yes. This is why some of you need to build an altar in your office. You need to build an altar in your car. And I'm not talking about a physical altar that you go to, you got Mother Mary and the candles and the saints and the cross. No, that's not what I'm speaking of. I'm talking about something that dwells there as a result of your consistency in the place of prayer. If you own a business, there needs to be an altar that's established there. And one of the ways that you can build an altar in a space is by consistently praying in that environment. Maybe let's talk about this tonight, right? Because I think it's very practical. Many of you go to work and you're dealing with certain things. You're wondering, how can I better this workspace? The way that you better your workspace, practically speaking, is to begin with your own office. So if you've been given a quarter, even if it's a cubicle, if you've been given an office, that's even better. Let's say it's a job, you're a teacher, you have your own classroom. You need to set something up in your space that heaven can look down upon and see that, okay, this school, this building has an opening through which we can ascend and descend. The Bible talks about Jacob. It says when he laid on the rock that he saw, his eyes were open and he saw angels ascending and descending. But that was only possible because it was on that same land that Abraham built an altar unto the Lord. So one of the things that altars are is that altars are utilized as ladders. Altars become portals through which spiritual entities can traffic in and out, not just demonic spirits, but even angels. And the kingdom of heaven can find an expression in an environment simply because an altar has been built there. And so if you want God to dwell in a space, then you need to build an altar in that space. And the way you build an altar is through your consistency in the place of prayer, right? If you have access to a space, let me give you some practical ways. Let's say you're in a building, you have your own office, right? And you want to begin to change the environment. You want things to be better in the office space. You begin with the office that you have. And when you begin with the office that you have, there are a few practical things that you can do. The first practical thing that you can do is to begin to continually saturate the environment with worship. And so this may look like you praying worship songs on a low volume. It doesn't have to be loud and blasting. Or this can even look like you playing worship instrumentals, right? And you have it there playing throughout the day. And so as the worship music, no, we don't need a physical altar for Jesus. Amen. Are you following me? Please don't. But now you can have a prayer room that you go to that's different as well. You can set up an altar in a room, but understand, whatever you put in a prayer room isn't what makes it spiritual. It's what you do that makes it spiritual. And I may touch on that as well. But as I was saying, you have the office, you're playing. One thing you could do, you're playing music, you're playing instrumentals, or you're even playing prayers, right? You're playing these prayers low. They don't got to be loud. People think that in order for spirituality to work, it's got to be bothering the person sitting next to you or standing next to you. That's not the truth. You can play these things in your working space and no one will even know, but it's doing something spiritually, right? It's doing something spiritually to the environment. That's one of the ways that you can begin to set up an altar. And then also what you can do is you begin to pray there. So you have certain days that, yes, you eat your lunch every day, but let's say you have certain days because you say, I want to create an altar in this space that you don't eat there that day. And what do I mean? Instead of you eating there, you fast that day and you go to that office of yours or that space that you have and you begin to pray. So even if it's 15 minutes, you're praying in tongues, 30 minutes, you're praying in the spirit, an hour lunch break you have, you're praying, you're anointing the environment. You begin to build an altar there. But you're doing it, don't worry, I'm going to get to the point where if you're sharing with others, but I'm talking about those, let's say you have your own space for now. But as you're doing it, you're building an altar. It's the consistency that matters. And it's something that you must not stop, right? It's something that you must not stop. It must be continual and it must be consistent. I'll give you a practical example. There's a woman of God that I know that they have a church, but then she also has a school. And so what she's established is that because she owns the school, she's able to have a prayer meeting. So she has a 7-hour prayer gathering with some women where they fast. No, it's two things they do. The first thing they do is that they fast the first 3 days of every month in that school. They fast. And they gather together and pray every day at 6 p.m. And then also, once a month, they gather together and they pray for about 7 hours that month. And so they've been doing that for like 15, 20, 10 years. 10 years. So that's an altar. And because of that consistency, there are certain things that just won't and just can't take place in that environment because of that altar that's been built and it's being serviced. As we were reading through Leviticus and Numbers, God was talking about how there was a sacrifice that was to be made, a burnt offering that was to be made on the altar continuously. And it was 2 burnt offerings each day, one in the evening and one in the morning. And it would always, so there was always something burning on the altar. Yes. Favor says, is this like establishing a covenant with the Lord? Yes, it's like establishing a covenant, basically. So there was always something that was burning, always a sacrifice that was being made, always a savor and aroma that was ascending up to the nostrils of God. This is one of the ways that you can cause a natural environment that may be filled with darkness. Because listen, the reason some areas are filled, you walk into some places and you feel uneasy, you feel confused, you feel frustrated, is because people have been there consistently lying. They've been there consistently stealing. They've been there consistently cussing. They've been there consistently listening to all kinds of nonsense, right? They've been there consistently engaging in all manners of sin. There has not been a priest that has dwelled in that space that can establish or set up an altar. And so altars are not just made to be built in your prayer room. No, it's something that is mobile. You can, as long as you have a right to be in that space, that means you have a right to set up an altar. So if you're working, I suggest, that you do, there are some consecrations that you do just for your workplace. I always give you guys an example of my mother, how she would gather some of the teachers and they would pray over the school, over the classrooms, anoint the chairs of the children. And because of this, a lot of the students would enter into her class as special ed students, but leave her class and enter into regular classes because an altar is being built there. And so there are some spiritual labors that you do, and the only reason you're doing it is not because you necessarily want something from God, but you're doing it because you specifically want to establish and build an altar in your place of work. Because most times you don't know what other people are entering into the workplace with. You don't know. See, when we talk about apostles to the marketplace, these are some of the things that we need to be teaching on. Because people go to the marketplace and they fail, and sometimes the reason they fail is not because they're not excellent. It's not because they don't have a revelation or the insight or the knowledge. Sometimes it's because of spirits that are dwelling in the marketplace. And so they must build an altar, because listen, Satan does not want a genuine believer to prosper. No. He does not want you to prosper. So you must find a way to get heaven involved in what you're doing. I'll say it again. You must find a way to get heaven involved in what you're doing. You see, we think that our spirituality is only meant for the church and for our home. That's where we get it wrong. And so we do certain things spiritual, but when it comes to our businesses, when it comes to our profession, when it comes to our labors, we rely and only depend on the ability and strength of the flesh. And that is the mistake that we make. So you must find a way to introduce heaven. And it doesn't have to be overt. You don't have to be not even overly spiritual, but religious about it, right? You can do this in such a way that the only people that don't know you're even doing this or maybe people who walk into and they see you praying, or other people who are spiritual and they can sense the difference. And you'll be surprised when you begin to do this, people could walk into your office. They'll walk into your office and they'll say, oh, this area feels different. This area feels lighter. You'll begin to notice that some people will even like to dwell in your office. They would like to sit there. You say, why do they keep coming in and out? It's because you've established an altar there. And so now when you build an altar in your own personal space, now what you're doing is you're giving heaven authorization through you to work in the entire building, to work in the entire environment. And so there may be some things that'll happen. Oh my God. I'm going to say this, and people may not like this, and people may get offended at me, but I believe it's the truth. The reason that we see a lot of school shootings is because the teachers there are not spiritual people. Even the ones there who are believers, they haven't been taught to build an altar. Because if you've built an altar in your school as a teacher, there are some things that even before the police catch onto it, the angel of the Lord, because remember, one of the things that happens when an altar is built is that angels begin to traffic up and down. And so that even before the police have to get involved and catch it, the angel of the Lord will cause some things to not happen. Because you've given heaven, because as a result of you building an altar, you've given heaven authorization to peer and to watch upon that space. Heaven says we now have a right to this land because of it. We have a right to this office. We have a right to dwell here. We have a right to function here. We have a right to operate here because one of our ambassadors has established an altar in this place. It's like putting a flag on the ground. But unfortunately, where believers are, but who are not prayerful and who are not spiritual, who are only working to get some bucks, this is what happens. We're unable to positively influence our environment. But this is what the church is for. The church is to teach you how to be a light. And this is one of the ways that you are called to be a light. Right? And so there are some things that can happen because an altar is not established. But when an altar is present there's some things that won't happen. There's some things. And because of your covenant with God, there can be a blessing. Listen, and we're talking about wisdom. We're talking about favor. We're talking about blessings. These are some things that come as a result of your covenant with God. So you can work in a place and you know because you're working there, that company is going to be blessed. And I can give you and a biblical example of this is Jacob, right? He worked with Laban, and the reason that he worked for Laban, and the reason that Laban was so blessed was only because Jacob was there. And because of the blessing that was upon Jacob and the covenant that he had with the Lord. And so because of that covenant and that blessing, Laban partook of the fruit. So Laban didn't even want to let him go because he himself knew that I'm being blessed because there's someone here with a covenant superior to the ones that I have of my own deities. Right? So you can work in an environment and the entire business begins to flourish, begins to be blessed because of your covenant with God and because of the fact that you've raised an altar. But what happens is this most times. Let me tell you. What happens is that we get hired, and so that we don't, just so that we're not rejected or ostracized, we begin to compromise. The problem with compromising in such an environment is that Satan wants you to compromise, not just so that you can be guilty. No, he wants you to compromise because when you compromise, and what does this look like in a work environment? You're laughing at jokes you're not supposed to be laughing at. They say, hey, the whole team is going to meet up in the bar after. And you choose to go and meet up with them, even though you know that that's probably not somewhere that you should be. You just go along with the flow and you're unwilling to say, hey, no, I'm sorry. I'll meet, I can get the rundown from you guys later. I'm not comfortable in that environment. Isn't it so interesting that Muslims, wherever they are, they're Muslims? Because they must pray that 5 times a day. They must find that closet there. There's certain things that they won't do. And they'll let you know it's because of their religious beliefs. But as Christians, it's like we don't even have religious beliefs. All we believe in is the money. Right? And so we compromise so easily. We don't feel as if our spirituality is worth establishing boundaries. And that's a shame. And the truth is sometimes we're ashamed of our religion. We're ashamed of our Christianity. Either we're ashamed of it and we don't want people to know, or we don't feel as if it's important enough to have boundaries and systems around us to cause us to not compromise. And so we get in these spaces and we compromise. We're having conversations that we should not be having. We're enjoying things that we should not be enjoying. They're listening to music and playing things, and you're singing along and bobbing your head and dancing with them, right? You are selling out. You're compromising. And so what happens is that Satan loves that because now you can't even go back and set up an altar because you've bought into the system. So how can you make a difference when you're among them? Right? How can you make a difference when you've lumped yourself, you've become like the world? That's the question. You can't. And so now you're a Christian. You go to church, you love the Lord, you may even be a leader in your church, but in your workplace, you're nobody. You're just a number like everybody else. And so the advantages that you would have, the advantages that you would have because of the altar that you've established and because of your consecration and because of the difference, you can't even have those, and you can't partake in those benefits. The advantage of wisdom, the advantage of revelation, the advantage of supernatural insight that you would receive because you've chosen to set yourself apart and be consecrated unto the Lord like Daniel was. You can't even get that. You can't get that type of, so God can't, he won't speak to you now, right? You'll just be a regular worker. He won't give you any special insight or revelation, because if he gives it to you, who's going to get the glory? He can't get the glory because you've compromised and you've become like everybody else in the workplace. So you're going to get the glory. Oh my God, I'll tell you this truth. I was just listening to a testimony of a man. He was talking about how he literally had the Lord come to him in the form of his pastor and give him the solutions to an equation that has not been solved since like the 1970s. And I mean, if you hear this man talking about his major, I'm like, is this English? It's math, but it's like, he got a PhD and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, is this, what language is this man speaking? I don't understand it. But he wasn't just a naturally intelligent individual. No. He chose to be spiritual in prayers, in fasting, in consecration, in separation, and the Lord would now give him insight. And so anytime he would get to a point of the equation that he could not proceed, what he would do? He would go and pray for 9 hours, 10 hours, fast. And in the place of that fast, he would have an encounter. And he would see the servant of the Lord come to him and begin to give him either to spell it out, either to write it out, or begin to give him the equation. And then he would take it back to those professors, and they would say, yes, you're on the right path, until he eventually solved it. What intelligence do you think that these people had to build some of the things they built in the ancient world? There are some things that were built in the ancient world that modern engineers are unable to replicate. Some of these technologies, some of the wisdom with which they constructed things was not gotten from the natural. Understand, they didn't go to school for some of this stuff. These days you have to go to school for it. They didn't go to school for some of this stuff. And they were able to build. Where did they get that information from? Where did they get that revelation from? It was spiritual. Beings came to them and gave them patterns. You know, we read through Leviticus. You see how God came to Moses and gave him the pattern to build. Right? When you read the book of Genesis, you see that they wanted to build a tower that ascended up to heaven. And God himself had to come down. He had to look at them. He had to say, hey, you know, if we leave these people, they are actually going to build something that will not just be high physically, but as it ascends in height, it's able to pierce through spiritual barrier. They said, let's make a tower that can go to God in heaven. And God said, no, if we leave these people, they're going to do it. What technology did they have? And the only way that God could stop them was to confuse them by giving them different languages. And these people didn't have engineering degrees. And so there is intelligence that comes from your study. But then there's intelligence, wisdom, excellence that comes from consecration, that comes from being set apart, that comes from your prayer life, that comes from your covenant with the Lord. There are certain things that the world needs a solution for. And God is looking for people who are consecrated enough that he can download the solution into their minds so that they can go and speak and say, I got this solution as a result of my relationship with the Lord. But you can't glorify God in that manner when you go into the workplace and you're like everybody else. There's no distinction and there's no difference. But when you build an altar unto the Lord in the workplace, God can now begin to traffic in and out. Let me say something. Everything that happened in the land of Babylon, it was simply because the children of Israel were there. And not just because the children of Israel were there, but specifically because of Daniel. So all of the dealings of the kings that were present during the lifetime of Daniel, they were all dealt with by the Lord because of the presence of a man who was consecrated, who was set apart. So your environment, your bosses, your supervisors, your managers, I'm telling you, God can touch them. He can speak to them. He can even give them insight, wisdom, revelation because of your presence. Right? And so think about yourself not just as someone who's working just a 9-to-5 just to get by. No. That's not your destiny. It says, whatsoever you do, do it not unto men, but as unto the Lord, knowing that you shall receive a reward from him. You do it what? You do it unto the Lord. What are you building? You can build an altar. And because of that altar, heaven can now invade. Heaven can ascend and descend. If there are strange manifestations, afflictions, confusions, attacks, betrayals in the workplace, you can build an altar there. And through the altar that you've established, those spirits are now chased out by the angels of the Lord. What are you building? What are you building in the space that God has given you? And so there are some believers, not just heard the Holy Spirit say this, he said there's some of you, the reason that you can't even be promoted is because heaven won't fight for you. No. Why should heaven help you be promoted if heaven isn't going to benefit from your promotion? And so heaven leaves you that you have to be the one to work. It says by the sweat of your brows. That's what he told Adam. So now Adam is not working a blessing, he's working the curse, right? Before Adam would labor and it would be and the ground would yield to him because it was blessed. But now after the fall, the ground is cursed. And so anything that comes from the ground by the sweat of his brow. And so now we are left to work the curse. So you're working and you're laboring, but even your labors aren't producing as much as it could, or it's producing based on your sweat because of the curse. So now you can choose to work the curse or you can choose to work the blessing. But you can't work the blessing if there's no altar. No, you can't work the blessing if there's no consecration, if there's no separation. It doesn't work that way. Heaven will not be invested in you to promote you, to advance you, to push you forward if it's not benefiting from your labors. Why should heaven advance you? Why should heaven take you from a place of a worker to a manager, to a boss? Why? When it can invest its resources in other individuals who are going to honor God, who are going to establish altars. And so now you come and you're looking for blessings and increase and elevation and etc. And it seems as though it's taking a lot for you to get it. But the reason it's taking a lot for you to get it is because you don't have a covenant with God in your workplace. You don't have a covenant with the Lord. There's no altar there. So heaven will not go out of its way. The most it can do is to let you. And so now by your own strength, by your own labor, by your own consistency, by your own devotion, you can get promoted. But how far can you go with that? Right? How far? Even in that, you're limited. But if you want a covenant of perpetual elevation, then an altar must be established, and you must make sure at every level heaven benefits from your labors. At every level. In everything you do, heaven is benefiting. Either it's benefiting from what you're literally doing there. Maybe there's an altar you've established, you've been praying, you've been fasting, you've given heaven the authorization to invade the environment, and people may get saved there without you even preaching to them, simply because an altar has been established. Or heaven is benefiting because you're taking what you're receiving from the job, salary-wise, and you're using it to sow for the advancement of the kingdom. Right? But even that, even if you're giving, even if you're sowing, that's still the lower level. You have to rise higher to become a priest in your environment. Someone says, how do we reverse the compromise at work? Establish boundaries. Be comfortable enough saying, hey, I'm not comfortable talking about this. When they're laughing about stuff, you know that it's lewd, you say, you don't laugh, you walk away. It may not make you look good in the moment, but you tell them, hey, I'm sorry, I can't. My religion, the same thing other people will say, my religion won't permit me to do this. Be confident enough in who you are in God. Right? Be confident enough. Let people know, let them see. Now, it's not overbearing. You're not trying to force them to believe. No, you're just letting them see that there's something in you that's different. And so now they see you as the person who's a religious individual, not religious in a negative sense, but religious in a sense that you are accountable to a higher power, God, the highest power, should I say. Come on, feel free to ask questions. I'm going to answer some of them as I can. What time is it? Oh, time is flying, my God. But I want to encourage you, because I want you to be fruitful. But as I said, there's fruitfulness. There are different types of fruitfulness. I don't want you to just work the curse. Some of you think that, okay, yeah, just being on here and praying every night is enough, is enough to get you promoted, etc. This is just the foundation. This is just the foundation. This is just positioning you to now build that altar. Someone says, how long does it take to build an altar? That shouldn't be a question, right? Because it's perpetual. It's never ending. So it's not about how long it takes to build it. It's how long will you remain. You have to set in your heart and say, as long as I'm here, I'm going to continue to. I'm going to continue to, right? Now, if you work remote, I mean, you're at home, so you build the altar in the house. So you're not necessarily going to influence the environment. Now you can influence the work culture by your communications with the people, of course. Seasoned with grace, seasoned with wisdom, seasoned with spirituality. You also have an excellent spirit. You see, one of the things that I don't like is when people are late to everything. And some believers, we're late to everything, right? We lack excellence. So one of the things that can hinder you is a lack of excellence. So because you know what that's doing? You are representing God. You are what? You are representing a kingdom. And so there must be excellence in everything you do. You're not just trying to do things to get it done. No. You're not just trying to do things because you're lazy and you want it done. You want to go sit. No. Right? Everything you do, there's a spirit of excellence because you see yourself as royalty. And so you want things done a certain way. You want it done the right way. Because you're representing a kingdom. That's one of the ways. You say, well, it's been on time, I have to do this. It's got a lot to do with it. Amen. Excellence. That's a good question. Someone asks, what does this look like in the school, in the university. It can look like a few things depending on how embedded you are in the university, because you can apply all of this. Let's say if you're an undergrad and you're in the campus, you're in the dorms, you can apply everything I've just said about the office into the dorm room, right? You're setting up an altar there. Prayer, fasting, communication with the Lord, worship music. You can set up an altar and you listen, and your roommate will, even if you have a roommate, they may feel uncomfortable doing certain things there because of the presence of God that's in that place. And it's the same thing. You must be consecrated. And so, I remember when I was in university, we would have believers that would go to Bible study on Thursdays, and then they would go out to what they call Thirsty Thursdays immediately after. Do you really think you can affect an environment living like that? And so you'll go to some university campuses, and that's where you'll see the definition of double-minded and inconsistent. Because just a few hours ago, they're in Bible study. And a few hours later, and sometimes even the people who are teaching the Bible study, you'll see them in Thirsty Thursday, and they're drinking, and they're partying, and they're dancing with everybody else. So the key is separation. The key is consecration. The key is boundaries. You're establishing these things because you know you're called to a higher order. Because Satan wants to make you ineffective. Understand me? He wants to make your spiritual labors ineffective. He wants to make your prayers ineffective. He wants to take away your authority. You see, authority is found in one of the things that makes authority is consecration. So you'll notice that people who have a higher level of authority, oftentimes there's a level of separation between them and everybody else. There's a reason that is. But if you're with everybody, you're doing everything that everybody is, you can't have authority. And so you're praying, saying, God bless my campus and let people be saved, and nothing's going to happen because you're living like the world. So there must be consecration. Also, excellence in your academic work, of course. So you're praying, you're fasting, you're seeking the same thing. You're praying, fasting, seeking the face of the Lord. You're using the opportunity to get involved. If you're in a master's degree level, and let's say you do have a little bit more time, you can get involved in some of the college fellowships to mentor them. At that point, depending on how long you've been saved, you should have been in a place where at least you know something. And you can mentor and guide. Even if it's one person, you're pouring into them, you're teaching them, you're mentoring them, right? You find someone to help. Someone says Vincent says, it gets lonely though sometimes. Listen, the reason that it may feel lonely is because there's something in you that has to be dealt with. Separation from the world should not feel lonely. If the truth is this, being in the world and doing what other people are doing is at that time that you should feel lonely. How many of you have been in a place where you're around people, but it's like, you know that you and these people aren't connecting. You're not connected. You know there's no connection there. And so you're in the midst of all these people, but you feel alone. That's where the loneliness should be. Right? You saying, I'm not going to be like the world. I'm not going to be around the world. I'm not going to act like the world. That shouldn't create loneliness within you. If it creates loneliness within you, then there may be, let's say, a need of affirmation there. There may be something in you that still wants to do those things. That's why now you feel lonely, because you're not doing the things that everybody else is doing, and you want to. And so you feel weird, disconnected, right? But I don't believe, as a believer, as a mature Christian, that we should feel lonely being separate. That's the standard that we should live to. So there shouldn't be any loneliness. What are you lonely about? Right? You shouldn't be lonely. You should take it with joy, knowing that you have chosen to stand for the Lord. Because if you're lonely about it, it's only a matter of time before Satan will capitalize on those emotions and cause you to fall. And so if you begin to feel that, then what you may need is 3 days of prayer and fasting, so that feeling can be burnt out. That's an indicator. There's a residue there, right? There's a residue that needs to be burnt out, and so you may have to give yourself to prayer and fasting. You say, God, I feel weird. I noticed that I feel weird not going to drink with these people or not hanging out with these people. I know I shouldn't feel this way. Let me go and pray and fast. There must be something there that needs to be expelled. And then as you're doing that, you're praying, you're saying, God, bring me godly community. But even if it's just you, it doesn't matter. Please understand me. These are the messages that we need to teach, because we need to get used to suffering for the Lord. Even if it's just you on an entire campus, and like Elijah was, he said, Lord, there's only me left. So be it. Let it be so. It's better to stand for righteousness alone than to be drawn into the mix of people because you want to belong. It's better to what? It's better to be by yourself, to be ostracized. When this happened in scripture times, they took it for joy. They were excited about it. They glorified God. They said, God, I now have this opportunity to be talked bad about for you. I receive it. I accept it. They loved it. So don't fall into that trap, and the enemy will make you feel as if, it's just you again, and no one's ever going to understand you, and you got to make all these sacrifices for God, and look at you, now you're sad, you don't got any friends, there's no one. Don't fall into that. Don't fall into that. Silence, command that voice to be silent, because the enemy wants you to begin to feel bad for yourself so that you can give yourself a reason to compromise. That's what's happening. I'll say it again. He wants you to feel bad for yourself so that you can give yourself a reason to compromise. So sometimes, you know what happened? Sometimes God will even delay our community, our godly community, because he wants to burn those feelings out of us. And he wants you to be confident with it just being you and him. So that by the time even that community comes, you're not idolizing them. Some of us idolize community. We idolize other people. And so sometimes God will allow us to walk by ourselves with just him so that we can be comfortable with it just being him. And then we can be comfortable enough so that we won't go out and make friends that he hasn't told us to. Right. But I said it to say, you need to step out and be a priest in everywhere you found yourself. And if you really listen to me, I've given you a key for constant elevation, constant promotion. I mean, it's a covenant. And some people in the workplace and in your school, they may not like you because of it, because of how vocal you are and how strict you are with your convictions. But it doesn't matter, because you'll continue to see the hand of God in your life. He'll continue to, he says, those that honor me, I will honor. Can you imagine that? God says that he will honor the people that honor him. So you choose to honor the Lord, and you'll be surprised what he does for you. But you can build an altar. If you're a teacher, build an altar, please. In your school, build one. You'll be surprised how the children change, how their actions and their character and their behavior begins to change. You'll be surprised how God begins to expose things that were supposed to happen that'll be at the detriment of the students and the teachers. He'll expose it because you are there. That's what we need in our generation. There's so much filth. You read, A lot of people want to do homeschooling, that's fine. You read some of the curriculums and stuff and the books that they're allowing into school, and the reason those things are allowed is it's not just because parents aren't going to the Board of Education and the meetings. It's because even in the classrooms, there's no altar, there's no priest there. And so Satan sends someone with an alternate lifestyle, and they begin to build their own altar there. And before you know it, they're inviting all these people, alternate lifestyles. They're opening the school up, all these books. Your children are reading it, and the kids go home and they say, I don't even know who I am anymore. Because a priest was not there. Right? Because a priest, someone was not there who can build something and resist the enemy from coming in. You can stand there. It can be, so you see, so many of us, we just want a microphone. We want to be effective in the church, but you can stand there, and that now becomes the place that you guard, that you govern, that you rule over. And God tells you, hey, whatever you say won't enter. And whatever you command to leave will leave. And so as long as you're there, there's a light in that territory. There's a light in that school. There's a light in that office. There's a light in that university. There's a light in that region because you've stood to raise an altar. This is why you're here as a believer. This is why God didn't just take you to heaven after you got saved. He wants you to influence the world. If you're in the political, regardless of what mountain you found yourself in, you can influence it to the better. And your influence in it is not just giving people your church card and saying, come to church. No. Build an altar there. Contend. Oh my God, I wish I could tell you. There was a testimony by the man of God. He was training his son how to pray. I know this is getting a little bit long, but I think it's so necessary because I want you to go into work this week and build an altar there. Begin to pray and fast. There was a man who a man of God who was teaching his son to pray. And so, he sent his son to boarding school, and he told his son, go and begin to pray there. As his son was praying there, you know what happened? A witch came up to his son, about 12 years old. And so he comes back, he tells his dad, he said, hey, this is what happened when I was praying. A witch came to me and told me to stop the praying that I'm praying. You know what his dad said? His dad said, that's good. He says, that is your assignment. You'll be surprised when you begin to pray in certain places, and when you decide that heaven must invade a certain space, you'll be surprised the type of encounters you're going to begin to happen. There are going to be some spirits that have ruled in that office, ruled over that company, ruled over that sphere of authority, and they may even visit you. They'll say, why? What are you doing? Who do you think you are to come and begin to upset the balance of power here? We've been here for years. Since the formulation of this company, we've been here. And they may even visit you. Or there are some people who have spirits of witchcraft and sorcery, and their spirits may even come to you, and they'll try to intimidate you, and they'll tell you to stop praying. It's not a natural thing. It's not just handing out Bible tracts and Bible, No, it's spiritual labor. Someone type spiritual labor. It's spiritual labor. And so you may have an assignment there. There may be something established there that God wants you to break. You don't know what's happening in the lives of people who are working in that place with you, or who are going to that school with you. You see, sometimes we go to our jobs, we go to our schools, we go back home, and everybody goes back home to their own house, and they may not even know, but they all now begin to struggle with the same thing. Because sometimes there's a spirit there. And the truth is that sometimes, I wish I could tell you some things. Sometimes, if there's a spiritual person in the office who's not of the Spirit of God, sometimes they can be promoted. And one of the reasons that they're promoted is because they are causing chaos in the lives of others. So do you know that there are some witches, they go and get hired in certain places? Do you think Jezebel only goes to churches? Do you think witches only go to churches? No. There are some witches that they are assigned to certain offices. They are assigned to certain campuses. They are assigned to certain schools. And when they're assigned there, they're given orders and they're saying, these families here, this is what you want, I want you to do. I want you to do this to the family. So this person is coming to work. They think they're just coming to get money and leave. They go home and their house is in chaos and confusion. There's affliction, there's sickness, there's divorce. Things are happening. They're wondering what's going on. It's the job. There's someone there on an assignment, but they don't know that. There's someone there with a spirit of witchcraft. They don't know that. They think the job is just a job. Even some Christians, they don't know what's going on. They'll go home and things are strange. They're saying, what's happening? I don't know what's happening. They don't know. It's someone there sent on an assignment. And their assignment, and I'm literally telling you how covens would gather together and they'll send witches out on an assignment. And so sometimes the power operating in that environment can even promote those witches. So that person now is now becoming a manager, is now becoming a supervisor, is now becoming a boss, now becoming an executive. And you don't know, the reason is not that they're that intelligent, it's not that their work is so good, but it may be because they fulfilled a certain quota and a duty that was given to them in the coven. And now they're promoted, not just spiritually, but also in a job, because now they can do more damage. They've been found faithful, because it's a spiritual principle. He that is faithful in little is faithful in much. And so you just walk in there, all you want is your check, because you want to have your white picket fence in that house, and I'm telling you, you'll be in for a rude awakening. Yes. Someone says lots of Freemasons here in the UK that work every minute of 9 to 5 jobs. Yes, sometimes they'll be gatekeepers. They don't want you to be promoted. So how can you be promoted now if there are sorcerers, if there are Freemasons and Eastern Stars, and they're working in certain places and they don't want you to be promoted because you're not one of them? How can you now be promoted? Are you going to be promoted because of how good your work is? No. There must be something else that you carry. There must be something else that you carry. You must be governed by another deity, by God. You must now see the job as not just a place to go and get a check, but as a battleground in a mission field. Oh my God. I want to challenge you to break out of the scope of the four walls and begin to utilize your authority in the spaces that God has given you. Some of you may have came on late because I saw someone ask a question, how do we set up an altar in the workplace? I said there are some things you can do. You can begin to listen to worship music and play it. The goal is to just saturate the place with spirituality on a consistent basis. Then also, there are some spiritual labors that you do only for that workplace. So you may fast the first 3 days of every month or 2 days out of every month specifically for that workplace. You may come in early and anoint the environment, and anoint your office, anoint your seat. You say, whoever sits in this seat. Then, do you know people can sit in seats and leave demons there? You have to be spiritual. You have to be spiritual to know some of these things. Someone can literally sit in a seat, right? They'll sit in a seat, they'll get up. But when they get up, they don't get up with everything that they sat down with. No. They'll leave something there. And then the next person who comes and sits on that seat, now that spirit enters into them. Did you know that? Right? There's some stuff. And so you're in your office and you're just sitting on certain seats. You don't know, and you're not a prayerful person. You sit in the wrong seat, now you're sick. You sit in the wrong seat, now you get into an accident. You sit in the wrong seat, now you lose your job because someone left the spirit there. This is why an altar has to be built. And so you're praying in that environment as much as you can. You're worshiping in that as much as you can. It doesn't have to be loud. You can have some of these prayers praying low, just praying. And someone will really have to hear it to even hear what's going on. You're coming in early. Maybe even drive around the building a few times, like they did the Wall of Jericho. Let's say every week you drive around the block. You pray in tongues around the building. You're praying. As you're driving around, you're praying. And you're declaring God to dwell in this office, in this place. Yeah. What if you have a prayer life? Will that protect you? Your prayer life will protect you if your prayer life is not just limited to your house. That's what I'm saying. If your prayer life is also evident in your place of work, then yes, you'll build an altar there because it's mobile. But if you're only a prayerful person where you in your house, right? If you're only prayerful by yourself in your house, if you turn off your spirituality when you get to the office, then you're going to be susceptible to certain things. That's what I'm saying. So now you have to be spiritual in the office and out of the office, in the house and out of the house, in the church and out of the church. And you must see the office space because you can be a prayerful person, but if you're not discerning, then the enemy can have an advantage. Yeah. Someone said, Cedric said, some Christians do yoga just as exercise. And some people, you're going to all these retreats with your job, all these meditations and yoga. You're not serious. Yoga is not something that can be done as exercise. It's not done as just exercise because the root of it is spirituality. That's like saying, I'm going to go to Halloween, but I'm just going to dress up and I'm just going to get some candy on the same day. It doesn't work. I actually prayed for someone before, and I'm going to say this, and we'll pray, because I think you guys have been blessed. I actually prayed for someone before who used to do yoga. And when I prayed for this person, the next day they woke up, you know what they saw? They saw footsteps leading from their yoga mat out their house. Because they invited certain spirits into their house because of what they were doing. As Paulie Light says, do not be paranoid, just stay on fire for God. So I'm saying this, I'm not teaching you this so you can be paranoid or afraid and say, oh my God, it's just heat. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying build an altar, be prayerful. Go there on an assignment. That's the purpose. Go there on an assignment. Go there where? Go there. You've been sent. Listen, you've been sent to that workplace. You've been stationed there by God. You've been sent to that school. You've been stationed there. There's a reason that you're there. There's a reason. You're not just there to be there. Come on, let's pray. The first thing you're going to pray is you're going to say, Lord, help me to no longer, if you're here and you know you've been convicted because you know you've been compromising in one way or another, I want you to begin to pray and say, Lord, have mercy on me for compromise, but help me to not compromise any longer. Help me, give me boldness, give me confidence to set boundaries and to be able to say no like Daniel did. Solima Antoska.